welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. I'm the author of the young adult fantasy Firian Rising and the sequel Into the Unreal, and this is English Nerd. So today in All About a Tale of Two Cities, I'm going to be talking about chapter 21 of book 2, Echoing Footsteps. I'm just going to be talking about that single chapter because Dickens published it by itself, and it's also enormously important. It's a turning point for every single character in the story, and so there's just a lot to say, a lot to talk about. So Echoing Footsteps starts off with a sort of montage of what's happening with the English characters before it jumps over to the French characters, because this chapter actually talks about both, as you know. The title, Echoing Footsteps, actually refers back to chapter 6, Hundreds of People, when at the end of that chapter, Lucie and Darnay and Carton and Dr. Manette are talking about the sound, the echoey house in Soho, and how it sounds like a bunch of echoing footsteps of people who are going to be coming into their lives, and they're kind of speculating about, you know, what they could imagine that to mean. So this is when the echoing footsteps become more of a reality. So what we get is a bit of a nice domestic view of Lucie and Darnay at first, and you can almost imagine like music going, and time passed, and then there was little Lucie. So Darnay and Lucie's first child is a daughter who's also named Lucie. This kind of relates back to that motif of doubles. We have a ton of doubles and parallels. You know, Jerry Cruncher's son is named Jerry Jr., and now Lucie's daughter is named Lucie. So we have Big Lucie and Little Lucie, as I like to call them, but that's not what Dickens says, of course. And then she has another child who's unnamed, a son. And so we get the first actual more direct scene when we get to him. It's unclear how old he was when he died. He got sick or something. It's a little bit unclear. It's very dreamlike, this whole first few pages. But I mean, he is younger than little Lucie. And at the end of the part that they talk about the English characters, little Lucie is only 6. So at most, this unnamed little boy was 5 when he died. And it should be a really sad moment in the chapter, but okay, I love Dickens, big Dickens fan, but there are times when I think, seriously, Dickens, really, this is what you want to say? So I'll just show you what I'm talking about. So, even when golden hair, like her own, so referring to the little boy, lay in a halo on a pillow around the worn face of a little boy, and he said, with a radiant smile, "Dear Papa and Mama, I am very sorry to leave you both, and to leave my pretty sister, but I am called, and I must go." Those were not tears all of agony that wetted his young mother's cheek as the spirit departed from her embrace that had been entrusted to it. What child speaks like that? I am called, and I must go. It sounds like a meme or something where he's floating heavenward, or I don't know. It's so stylized and over dramatic that I just can't get behind it. I'm sorry, Dickens. I'm sorry. I think it's weird. I think it's a really strange choice. So anyway, moving along. So Dickens segues from the admitted tragedy of this little boy to Sidney Carton, who comes around the house 4 or 5 times a year because of that deal that he made with Darnay in the plea chapter. And it seems like he's not, suddenly an amazing person or anything, but he doesn't come to the house drunk anymore. And the Darnay children really like Carton, which is kind of cute. I think they sense that there is some attachment that he has to their mother. At least that's what Dickens speculates. So Lucie, it's mentioned a few times in this chapter, is busily winding the golden thread that ties them all together. So she's kind of the epicenter of everything that happens on the English side. Even Mr. Stryver has some kind of pull still to her, but we get an update on Stryver too. I'm telling you, this chapter is like everyone, update on everyone. So Stryver, it says, Stryver was rich, had married a florid widow with property and 3 boys who had nothing particularly shining about them, but the straight hair of their dumpling heads. I like this. I think it's funny. So Stryver, before, when he was talking to Carton about marrying or proposing to Lucie, he says, I'm going to do it even though she's not rich. Aren't you proud of me? And Carton just says, why should I not be proud of you? And here he does end up marrying for money, it seems. So he's rich, he's married this widow with a ton of money, and these 3 dumpling-headed boys. And he wants it. There are these great character moments. This is one of the things that I really like about Dickens. He just enjoys his characters so much. So Stryver brings his 3 little dumpling-headed kids to Darnay to be tutored in French, because that's, Darnay's job, because obviously he speaks perfect French, because secretly he's the Marquis. Saint Evermond. But anyway, so Stryver brings them, and he says, "Hello, here are 3 lumps of bread and cheese toward your matrimonial picnic, Darnay." And Darnay just refuses to tutor them. And it's mentioned in just a couple of sentences, but you have to admit that's pretty funny. And then we learn how Stryver's kind of done his lawyerly twisting of the facts as well. When he talks about Lucie, now Darnay, to his wife, the rich widow, he says, yes, back in the day, she tried to catch me. She tried to use her feminine wiles, but I would not be caught. I was waiting for you, darling. So obviously that's almost exactly the opposite of what happened, but it's just so very Stryver-y that I had to point it out. So then it returns. We find out that little Lucie is 6 years old. All this time has passed, and we're now in 1789, specifically July 14th, 1789. Now, if you know your history or you are yourself French, then you will know that that is Bastille Day, my friends. That revolution that's been brewing across the channel in France is about to explode. And although we're still with our English characters, even they have this foreboding feeling. So there's this storm. Darnay says, "Ooh, look how gloomy and threatening the sky is." This, by the way, is an example of the pathetic fallacy, which is a lame name for it. But the pathetic fallacy is when the weather mirrors the emotions and the thoughts and actions of the characters. So it's like the end of every Disney movie, right? If something sad's happening, then it's raining. If something happy is happening, then the sun is shining. So here we have these really foreboding, terrible things about to happen in France, and in England there are storms. The weather is super gloomy. So it's a good example of that pathetic fallacy. It's considered a fallacy because obviously the weather doesn't mirror the emotions of people really, but it's just a great way to underline that in a story sense, underline those emotions. Okay, then it wraps up the English characters, and there's actually a little break. Normally we don't get a scene break like that in Dickens, but we do in this chapter because he really covers a ton of ground. So here he is with the French characters, and the dam has broken, essentially, on the revolution. We know that things have been brewing ever since we first saw the French characters with the Jacques looking in on Dr. Manette, being inspired to revolution, or Gaspard writing blood on the wall with that spilled red wine. We've known that this was coming. We learned more of the details with Madame Defarge and her knitting and everything, and here everything just loses it. The most prominent metaphor throughout this whole thing is water. There's an ocean that breaks free, or a sea, or as it says here, as a whirlpool of boiling waters has a center point, so all this raging circled round Defarge's wine shop. So it's this human ocean that's crashing, about to crash against the Bastille. Right now they're just gathered at the wine shop, which also symbolically makes sense because toward the beginning we found out very clearly that red wine is meant to symbolize blood in this story. And so what better place for there to be this meeting of the revolutionaries than that wine shop? the place where the wine comes from. Ugh. Okay, so Defarge is calling to all of his Jacques, including Jacques 3. I don't know why he'd want Jacques 3 there. Seems like a complete creeper to me. But he says, "Where is my wife?" Well, here you see me," said Madame, composed as ever, but not knitting today. Madame's resolute right hand was occupied with an axe in place of the usual softer implements, and in her girdle were a pistol and a cruel knife. So she's not knitting anymore. There's no need, because now that doom that she's knitted into her register is going to start to come true. This is the beginning of the revolution. But notice, Madame Defarge has not one weapon, not two weapons, but three. 3 weapons. She has an axe, a pistol, and a knife. She literally has more weapons than hands. This is a violent woman, and we get ample proof of that by the end of the chapter, but we just right away get this sense that she is not just some, meek woman. No, she is not only tough, but rather bloodthirsty as well. So she says, "You shall see me at the head of the women by and by." So Defarge is leading the men, and Madame Defarge is leading the women. And then they go again like an ocean or a sea or this dam that's broken to the Bastille, that prison. And they fight for a few hours. The people at the Bastille eventually surrender, and the sea breaks into the Bastille. So here's a painting of the event that you can take a look at. But the Defarges and everyone else rush in. They spread out, and Defarge says, "Show me the North Tower, quick." What is the meaning of 105 North Tower? Now, 105 North Tower, we remember, is the cell where Dr. Manette stayed. It was what he thought his name was in the Shoemaker chapter when they asked, "What is your name?" 105 North Tower. Is that all? 105 North Tower. So, Monsieur Defarge goes with Jacques 3, the golem of the group, the one who just is like, yes. And they're shown where that cell is. So we kind of follow them to the cell, and they go in. They have this light that they take along the walls to kind of investigate, and we get this. So, "Stop, look here, Jacques." "A.M., croaked Jacques 3 as he read greedily. Literally, he doesn't speak, he just croaks, if you pay attention. Read it again if you've read the book, and you'll see he's always croaking. It's creepy. "A.M., croaked Jacques 3. "Alexandra Manette," said Defarge in his ear, following the letters with his swart forefinger. So they're looking for evidence that Dr. Manette was there. And if we recall, in the Hundreds of People chapter, Darnay told that story about initials not initials, but letters scrawled into the rock in a prison cell in the Tower of London. And that story made Dr. Manette completely freak out. Apparently it's because he did something kind of similar. So Dickens, kind of like you would in a movie, just doesn't follow up on that portion of the story. Instead, he kind of fades to black on that and then comes back up in the courtyard where you have Madame Defarge and some of the prisoners and the officers of the Bastille. But it's super important, if you're reading this for the first time especially, to remember that Dr. Manette did find, or not Dr. Manette, Defarge found Dr. Manette's initials in 105 North Tower. So then we go, like I said, back to Madame Defarge, and we get this. In the howling universe of passion and contention that seemed to encompass this grim old officer, conspicuous in his gray coat and red decoration, there was but one quite steady figure, and that was a woman's. So they've captured, they call him the governor, but I think it's just the governor of the Bastille, the one who's in charge of the prison. So Madame Defarge is standing there right next to this governor that's being literally mobbed. This is the first actual full-on mob that we see in the story, although we've seen lots of, smaller versions or foreshadowings. This is full-on mob action. So, "See, there is my husband," she cried, pointing him out. "See, Defarge." She stood immovable close to the grim old officer, and remained immovable close to him. Remained immovable close to him through the streets as Defarge and the rest bore him along. Remained immovable close to him when he got near his destination and began to be struck at from behind. Remained immovable close to him when the long-gathering rain of stabs and blows fell heavy. Was so close to him when he dropped dead under it that, suddenly animated, she put her foot upon his neck and with her cruel knife, long ready, hewed off his head. This is intense, and there are two things that I want to emphasize here. So obviously we have this relentless kind of repetition, the kind of repetition that we saw in the wine shop chapter when it said, hunger did this, hunger, hunger, hunger. So again, that term is anaphora. It's that repetition of, it's a repeated word or phrase at the beginning of usually successive clauses. So remained immovable close to him is our repeated phrase there with Madame Defarge to emphasize her not only determination but just ruthless. It goes beyond determination or ruthlessness. There's a word and I can't think of what it is. But anyway, so we have another clear example of anaphora here, and then another thing is, it's easy to say, oh, okay, so Madame Defarge kills the governor of the Bastille. She doesn't kill the governor of the Bastille. If you were paying attention, it was the mob that killed the governor of the Bastille. And only after he was dead did she cut off his head. It would have been violent enough for her to kill him that way. I mean, horrifying. But there's something about how it's not enough for her that he's dead. She has to mutilate the body. To me, this kind of reminds me of the conversation that Madame Defarge had with her husband in Still Knitting, when he says that the revolution is going to be like lightning strikes, getting those people who deserve it. And she says that the revolution will be like an earthquake swallowing a town. Her vision of the revolution is more violent and intense and widespread than Defarge's. I think you could kind of say that Defarge would kill the governor because he thinks he deserves it, and Madame Defarge would be the one mutilating his body afterwards. That's kind of the difference between them. They're both violent, but she takes it and kicks it up a notch, and she does that in the next few chapters as well. But this is the first time we really see it. So intense. Okay, so again, it's the whole group of people. This mob is described as this ocean or this sea of threatening waters. And to me, that shows not only the power, the destructive power of these people, but also the potential for cleansing as well. And the dehumanization of mobs. It really is like a super effective metaphor that Dickens could have chosen, because it shows both the positive potential that the revolution has and the horrifying repercussions that it can have as well. So finally, we have 7 prisoners who are released, and then it says 7 gory heads on pikes as well. So I mentioned before that there was beginning, you could just barely see it, so I pointed it out, but there's this eye for an eye vision of justice from both sides, the upper and the lower class. We saw it with Gaspard's execution. When Gaspard killed the Marquis, the letter around the knife hilt said, "Drive him fast to his tomb," this from Jacques. And then when Gaspard was caught about a year later and executed, the soldiers say, "Drive him fast to his tomb," and echo his words. And so here we have 7 prisoners who are released and 7 guards, 7 workers at the prison who are killed and decapitated. So there's this really brutal eye for an eye situation going on that, again, persists throughout some of the next chapters. Whew, that was a lot. I feel like I was talking quickly, and this video is still 20 minutes long. But that is Echoing Footsteps. If you're studying this book for the first time, this is a chapter that you need to know, no matter who's teaching this to you or what class you're taking. Chapter 21, Echoing Footsteps, is one of the most important chapters with the storming of the Bastille. So, I think that's it. Like this video if you like it. Ask me any questions that you have down below. And don't forget to subscribe for more English nerdy goodness. All right, I'll see you soon.